Open a 1965 Junior League cookbook. Flip to the casserole section. There are more pages there than all the breakfasts, all the salads, and all the desserts combined. Smudged thumbprints on the favorites. Marginalia in ballpoint blue, reading "Double the Cheese" or "Church Supper, 1967," everyone asked. The casserole was not a side hustle of the American kitchen in the 60s. It was the main event, the king of the covered dish. The reason you owned a 9x13 Pyrex in Harvest Gold and a second one in turquoise for when the first was already in the oven. Here are 50 that deserve a second try, clustered by the protein or the produce that made them sing, because a decade this rich deserves to be walked through, room by room, like the house your grandmother kept immaculate for company. Consider why casseroles owned the 60s so completely. The post-war kitchen had electrified. Refrigerators were bigger, ovens more reliable, and Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, around since 1934, had finally found its true calling as the binder of a nation. In 1955, a Campbell's home economist named Dorcas Riley combined that soup with canned green beans and French's fried onions and handed America a casserole so perfectly engineered it would appear on an estimated 20 million Thanksgiving tables every year for the next 7 decades. By the mid-60s, Dorcas's green bean casserole wasn't a recipe. It was a law of nature. The Pillsbury Bake-Off had been running since 1949. Betty Crocker's picture cookbook had sold millions. Julia Child had arrived on public television in 1963 and quietly elevated what a baking dish could hold. And in 1966, Southern Living magazine launched and anointed the casserole as the official ambassador of Southern hospitality. Put it together, and you get a decade when a woman could feed 8 people from a single pan, walk it down the block to a potluck, and receive a handwritten thank you note by Wednesday. Let's start with the chickens, because there were more chicken casseroles in the 60s than there were sitcoms on television. Chicken Devon leads the flight, born at the Devon Parisian restaurant. In Manhattan in the 30s, Devon layered poached chicken breast over tender broccoli spears, bathed in a sherry-spiked cream sauce, dusted with Parmesan, and sent under the broiler until the top went freckled and gold. The steam that rose when you peeled back the foil smelled like butter and wine, and the kind of confidence that came from serving something French at a Tuesday bridge club. Then there was King Ranch chicken, a Texas invention with almost nothing to do with the actual King Ranch and everything to do with Texas generosity. Shredded chicken, Rotel tomatoes, cream of chicken, and cream of mushroom soup, a full pound of Velveeta, and corn tortillas torn and layered like lasagna noodles. Baked until the cheese came up through the cracks in little volcanic ridges. Poppy seed chicken was the Sunday lunch monarch of the South. Shredded chicken, sour cream, cream of chicken soup, a rain of poppy seeds, and a topping with its own mythology. A full sleeve of Ritz crackers crushed by hand, tossed with melted butter, pressed across the top until it looked like a beach at sunset. When it came out of the oven, that crumb cracked under the serving spoon like frost breaking, and the cream beneath sighed up in steam. Chicken tetrazzini came next, named for the great Italian coloratura Luisa Tetrazzini, who around the turn of the 20th century sang opera in San Francisco, with a voice reviewers called a nightingale with a megaphone. A chef, possibly at the Palace Hotel, built her a dish of diced chicken, spaghetti, mushrooms, sherry cream, and Parmesan. By the 60s, every church cookbook had a version. Turkey tetrazzini was its thrift-minded sister, the reason the day after Thanksgiving existed at all. Chicken a la king had started as a hotel dish in the late 1800s, served in chafing dishes at the Brighton Beach Hotel or Delmonico's, depending on which food historian you're reading. By the 60s, it had been domesticated into a casserole. Chicken, pimentos, mushrooms, green peppers, and cream, spooned into a Pyrex and topped with puff pastry squares from a blue and white Pepperidge Farm box. Hot chicken salad casserole was the controversial cousin, the dish that divided a generation. Cooked chicken, celery, slivered almonds, water chestnuts, lemon juice, and a full cup of mayonnaise, baked until the mayo went glossy and the top toasted brown. People who grew up with it defend it fiercely. Warm mayonnaise in a baking dish was a 60s love language, and hot chicken salad was fluent in it. Here's the thing nobody tells you about 60s casseroles. They were engineered. Everyone had a layering logic, a binder, a crown. And the crown, more often than not, came from a box. French's fried onions, Ritz crackers, Lipton onion soup mix, Pepperidge Farm stuffing, crushed potato chips, Doritos after Frito-Lay rolled them out nationally in 1966. Which brings us to chicken and rice with Lipton onion soup, a dish so simple it bordered on alchemy. Raw chicken thighs, raw long-grain rice, 1 can of chicken broth, 1 can of water, and 1 packet of Lipton dry onion soup sprinkled on top like dust on a shelf. Foil on, oven for 90 minutes, foil off. What you got was rice perfumed with onion and chicken fat, meat that pulled from the bone with a fork, and a brown crust around the edges that cooks fought over with the good spatula. Chicken broccoli. Divan was divan for the weeknight, sturdier and cheaper, using boneless breasts and cheddar instead of Parmesan. Curry powder and a pinch of mustard for lift. Chicken enchilada casserole brought the Tex-Mex crossover home, layering tortillas with shredded chicken, green chile, sour cream, and Monterey Jack, an entire regional cuisine compressed into a 9x13 and pulled out of the oven while the cheese still bubbled at the corners. You could feed a Cub Scout den with 1 pan and have leftovers for lunch the next day, and you did, and nobody complained because the tortillas went soft and the chile got into everything, and the second day was maybe better than the first. Now into the beef section, where the 60s really flexed. Beef and noodle casserole was Hamburger Helper before Hamburger Helper existed, which it didn't until 1971. Ground beef browned with onion, egg noodles, tomato soup or jarred sauce, sour cream, and cottage cheese, layered and baked until the top caught color. The cottage cheese melted into little cloud-like pockets. The noodles at the edges crisped. The center stayed tender and saucy. Johnny Marzetti was its Ohio cousin, born in Columbus at Marzetti's restaurant in the 20s, named for the owner's brother. By the 60s, it was the official casserole of Midwest elementary school cafeterias. Elbow macaroni, ground beef, tomato sauce, cheddar, and depending on the family, olives or peppers or mushrooms. The name alone made children sit up straighter. Taco casserole arrived with the Doritos, and once it arrived, it stayed. Browned beef with a packet of taco seasoning, refried beans, a layer of Doritos crushed but not pulverized, sour cream, shredded cheddar, and another layer of Doritos on top, baked until the chips on top went from crackling to crunch chewy, and the cheese between them stretched in long, theatrical ropes when you served it. Hungarian goulash casserole was the import with paprika in its veins. Cubed beef, onions, a heavy pour of sweet Hungarian paprika, caraway seeds. If the cook was a purist, egg noodles folded in at the end, and a crown of sour cream dolloped on just before serving so it melted into streaks. Shepherd's pie which in America almost always meant ground beef rather than lamb, and therefore should technically be called cottage pie, was the casserole that taught a whole generation of children to love peas, and carrots in gravy because there were mashed potatoes on top, and the potatoes were browned with a fork tine pattern and little pools of butter held in the grooves. Take a breath. That's a lot of beef. American goulash, distinct from its Hungarian ancestor, was the weeknight workhorse. Elbow macaroni, ground beef, onion, green bell pepper, crushed tomatoes, garlic, Italian seasoning, topped with cheddar and broiled until it's spotted. That perfume, tomato and pepper and beef and just browned cheese, is the smell of after-school homework in 100,000 linoleum kitchens. Stroganoff casserole took Russian aristocracy and handed it to the suburbs. Beef strips or ground beef, mushrooms, onion, beef broth, sour cream, and egg noodles, folded together, and baked until the edges pulled away from the Pyrex. The original stroganoff of the 1800s had been a sauté, but America loved to bake what other countries braised. Cabbage roll casserole freed the Eastern European housewife. Traditional cabbage rolls, golabki in Polish, holubtsi in Ukrainian, required you to blanch whole heads, peel the leaves, and roll each one around a fist of rice and ground pork. That was a Saturday. The 60s cook said no thank you, chopped the cabbage, layered it with the filling, poured tomato sauce over the top, and baked it. Everyone called it by the honest name, unrolled cabbage rolls. Beef and bean enchilada casserole crossed the border all the way. Corn tortillas, seasoned ground beef, refried beans, red enchilada sauce, black olives, and cheddar. Baked until the tortilla edges peeking out at the corners went darker than you thought they should. They weren't burnt. They were toasted. There's a difference, and the 60s knew it. Now pork, which in the 1960s was still the other white meat's more generous older sibling. Pork chop and rice casserole was the dump and bake champion. Thick-cut bone-in pork chops, raw, long-grain rice, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a can of French onion soup, and a splash of water. You layered rice on the bottom, chops on top, poured the soups over everything, sealed the whole thing with foil, and walked away for an hour and a half. When you pulled the foil back, the steam came out, in a thick white column. That is the sound and scent of 60s dinner, the foil release hiss and the vapor ghost. And the chops had sunk into the rice, and the rice had drunk the soup, and the whole pan smelled like mushroom and onion and browned pork fat. Scalloped potatoes with ham was the Easter Monday leftover redeemer. Thin-sliced russets, diced leftover ham, onion, a bechamel or a cream of something shortcut, cheddar or Gruyere if you were being continental. Baked low and slow until the top layer of potatoes turned into a chewy leathered lid and the inside went creamy. Ham and cheese strata came out of the same tradition, a crustless bread pudding for savory occasions, cubed white bread and ham and cheddar, and scallion and a custard of eggs and milk poured over the top and left to soak overnight in the fridge. Pork and sauerkraut casserole was New Year's Day pork luck in a baking dish, a Pennsylvania Dutch tradition transplanted to the suburbs. Country-style ribs or boneless loin, refrigerated sauerkraut, rinsed and drained, brown sugar, caraway, a whisper of apple cider baked until the pork shredded under a fork and the kraut turned from sharp to tender tangy. Kielbasa and kraut was its Polish cousin, coin-cut sausage and kraut, sometimes a layer of sliced potatoes underneath, served with mustard and rye bread. Both dishes reminded you that the 60s cook remembered where her grandmother came from, even while she reached for the cream of mushroom can. Let's pivot to the seafoods, because every 60s dinner party worth its salt had at least one. Tuna noodle casserole was the quiet giant of the decade, more common than meatloaf, more forgiving than roast chicken. The dish every new bride learned first. Egg noodles, canned tuna in oil, cream of mushroom soup, frozen peas, evaporated milk, a spoonful of pimento for color, and the most important component, a top layer of crushed ruffles, or lays, pressed into the surface and baked until the salt went brittle and the chips shattered at the serving fork. That salt snap is the texture that defined the dish. Tuna melt casserole was its richer cousin. Same base, but with sliced, sharp cheddar melted across the top under the broiler, blistered and freckled and stringing when you cut into it. Shrimp Creole casserole took New Orleans home to Ohio. Shrimp, the holy trinity of onion and celery and green pepper, a red, roux-thickened tomato sauce with paprika and cayenne, served either over rice or baked with rice right in the dish. Most 60s versions went the one-pan route because one pan was always the right answer. Salmon loaf is close enough to a casserole for our purposes, and the 60s absolutely included it at this table. Canned pink salmon, egg, cracker crumbs, lemon, onion, and dill, pressed into a loaf pan and baked until a fork lifted flakes clean, served with a lemon dill sauce, or, more often, a straight pour of melted butter. Tuna and rice casserole was the minimalist cousin of tuna noodle, swapping out noodles for leftover rice, adding a handful of peas and a snow of Parmesan, topped with breadcrumbs tossed in butter and baked until the top went amber. Pause and notice something. Half the dishes we've named used a can of soup, of tomatoes, of fish. That was not a failure of ambition. It was strategy. Canned goods in the 60s were some of the best shelf-stable food in American history. Campbell's still used fresh dairy cream in its soups. Del Monte's tomatoes had their acid and sugar balanced for cooking. Bumblebee and Chicken of the Sea packed tuna in oil because oil kept the fish moist. The 60s cook was using modernity to speed up what her mother had spent all day doing, and the results were faster, often more reliable. The casserole was the document of that truce. Seafood Newburg was the dish you made when somebody's boss was coming for dinner. Crab or lobster, or a blend of shrimp and scallops, a sherry-enriched cream sauce, egg yolks for silk, a dusting of cayenne, a layer of toasted bread cubes or puff pastry on top. The sauce was invented in 1892 at Delmonico's in New York, first called lobster à la Wenberg for the sea captain who brought it to the chef, then renamed Newburg after Mr. Wenberg fell out of favor. By the 60s, it had slid comfortably into junior league cookbooks. Crab Imperial was its Chesapeake cousin. Jumbo lump crab folded with mayonnaise, mustard, Worcestershire, egg, and a pinch of Old Bay, mounded into ramequins or a shallow casserole, topped with buttered breadcrumbs, or paprika, baked just until the crab set and the top browned. Now into the vegetables, where the 60s did some of its strangest and most beautiful work. Vegetable stuffing. Casserole took a bag of Pepperidge Farm herb-seasoned stuffing, a bag of frozen mixed vegetables, a can of cream of chicken soup, a stick of butter, and a cup of water. Mixed them all together, poured them into a Pyrex, and baked them until the top crisped. It was the vegetable side dish that tasted like Thanksgiving and showed up in November, December, and every potluck in between. Squash casserole was the South's yellow love letter. Sliced yellow summer squash, onion, cream of chicken soup, sour cream, shredded carrot, a bag of Pepperidge Farm herb stuffing tossed, with melted butter layered and baked until the squash went creamy and the stuffing on top and bottom crunched like fall leaves. Southern Living printed a version of it in its inaugural year, 1966, and the recipe has never left print since. Corn pudding was the between-category genius, neither fully a side nor a dessert, a spoonable custard of whole kernel and creamed corn, eggs, milk, butter, a little sugar, a little flour, baked until it just set in the center. Zucchini casserole with rice was the august answer to the zucchini glut, the same problem every gardener in the 60s faced when a single plant produced more squash than a family could eat in a week. Sliced zucchini, cooked rice, onion, sharp cheddar, eggs, a bit of cream, baked together until the top turned golden and the inside set into something between a gratin and a soufflé. Sweet potato casserole with marshmallows was the holiday table's brightest smile. Mashed sweet potatoes with butter, brown sugar, orange juice, and zest, and a topping that generations still argue about. Some households used a brown sugar pecan streusel. Some used a ceiling of mini marshmallows, and the bravest did both, layering streusel first and marshmallows second, so you got crunch and marshmallow char in the same forkful. Green rice casserole is the weird, wonderful 60s dish that almost nobody makes anymore, and almost everyone should. Cooked long-grain rice, a bag of frozen chopped spinach squeezed dry, beaten, eggs, evaporated milk, minced onion, sharp cheddar, melted butter, and, depending on the cook, a can of green chilies or a spoonful of dried parsley. Baked until the eggs set and the top went speckled green and gold. It was the vegetable side that somehow photographed well in black and white, and it appeared in cookbooks with names like Gourmet, On the Go, and the I Hate to Cook book. Broccoli rice casserole was its cheesier cousin and another Southern Living favorite. Cooked rice, chopped broccoli, cheese whiz or Velveeta, cream of mushroom soup, sautéed onion and celery, baked until the cheese pooled into the rice and the top went bronzed. Spinach casserole with artichoke is the dish that would later, in the 80s, become spinach artichoke dip, but in the 60s it was already a baked casserole side. Frozen chopped spinach, canned artichoke hearts, cream cheese, sour cream, parmesan, a squeeze of lemon, a grate of nutmeg, breadcrumbs on top, baked until the edges went brown and the center bubbled. Eggplant Parmesan casserole brought southern Italy into the American baking dish. Sliced eggplant, salted, and drained, floured, and fried, layered with tomato sauce and mozzarella and Parmesan, baked until the cheese stretched in. Long stringing bridges when the serving spoon pulled up. Stuffed pepper casserole was the same trick cabbage roll had pulled. Instead of carving out individual bell peppers and stuffing them one by one, you chopped the peppers, browned the beef with rice and tomato and onion, and baked it all together. All the flavor, a third of the time, and you could still say you made stuffed peppers. Mac and cheese in the 60s was not the boxed blue and yellow miracle that ruled the 70s and 80s. It was baked. Elbow macaroni, a bechamel built with real butter and flour and whole milk, layered with sharp yellow cheddar and sometimes a little Velveeta for stretch, topped with buttered breadcrumbs and more cheese, baked until the crust crackled and the sides caramelized where the sauce met the Pyrex. 3-cheese rotini was the dinner party upgrade, using spiral pasta and 3 distinct cheeses, often cheddar, Monterey Jack, and Parmesan, or cheddar, Gruyere, and Swiss, so the flavor had more range than a single-note cheddar could give. Lasagna, by the mid-60s, was becoming ubiquitous in a way it simply had not been before. Italian-American families had cooked it for generations in enclaves in New York and Boston and Chicago, but it was the 60s that made it a Midwest dinner party staple. Part of that credit goes to Julia Child, whose The French Chef and subsequent books elevated every kind of baked pasta in the national imagination. And part goes to the supermarket lasagna noodle, finally appearing in dry boxes next to the spaghetti. Moussaka was the exotic import, the dish that said you'd traveled or at least read a travel magazine. The Greek layered casserole of eggplant, spiced ground lamb or beef, and a bechamel top, browned until the custard set and the edges darkened. The Time Life Foods of the World series, which launched in 1968, brought dishes like moussaka into the suburban repertoire. Julia Child covered it on television. By the end of the decade, a well-read hostess in Cleveland or Atlanta could make moussaka and have her guests know what it was. Now the brunches and the breakfasts, because the 60s invented the make-ahead morning casserole and refused to apologize. Breakfast casserole was the queen of the Christmas morning kitchen. Cubed white bread, browned breakfast sausage, shredded sharp cheddar, 6 to 8 eggs whisked with milk and a little dry mustard, assembled in a Pyrex the night before and refrigerated overnight so the bread drank the custard. In the morning, you pulled it out, let it come to room temperature, and baked it until the top, puffed and freckled, and the inside stayed tender and eggy. It was Christmas morning cooking without Christmas morning cooking. French toast casserole ran the same play for the sweet side of the table. Cubed brioche, or challah, or white bread, a custard of eggs and cream and vanilla and cinnamon and a little orange zest poured over the top and left overnight, baked in the morning with a brown sugar pecan streusel scattered across the surface, the edges caramelized. The center stayed custard. Maple syrup poured in a ribbon across the top disappeared into the cracks. Hash brown casserole was required by unspoken law at every Southern funeral, wedding, and Sunday potluck. Frozen, shredded hash browns, thawed and squeezed. Cream of chicken soup, sour cream, cheddar diced onion, melted butter, topped with crushed cornflakes tossed in more butter, baked until the top turned the deep gold of late October corn. Southerners called it funeral potatoes because it was the dish you brought when words failed. Denver casserole was the Denver omelet made sleepable, cubed white bread, diced ham, sautéed onion and green pepper, shredded cheddar, a custard. Of eggs and milk, assembled the night before and baked in the morning. The hotel breakfast buffet in a home Pyrex. Country ham and grits casserole is the one I want you to remember because it proves a casserole can be both elegant and regional. Cooked stone-ground grits spooned into a Pyrex, diced country ham, sharp cheddar, a custard of eggs and cream, a grate of fresh nutmeg, baked until the top set, and the edges pulled away from the dish in little golden curls. You cut it into squares for Christmas breakfast, or smaller squares for brunch, or ate it cold out of the Pyrex at midnight because you could not stop thinking about it. The 60s knew that grits and ham and cheese were meant to meet in a baking dish. We are still catching up, so where does this leave us? With 50 casseroles, walked through, and a decade put back on the table? The 60s casserole was not nostalgia food. It was engineered food made with love, built for a specific problem. Feed a family of 5, feed a church of 50, feed grief, feed celebration, feed Tuesday. And that problem has not gone away. We still need to feed people, We still want the foil peel hiss and the cheese stretched in a rope and the smell of butter and onion meeting in a hot oven. Cream of mushroom is still on the shelf. Ritz crackers still crumble in the hand. The Pyrex your grandmother used still holds exactly 9 cups and still does the job it was made to do. Here is the heritage invitation. Pick 5 casseroles from this list you have never made. Not 5 you've heard of. 5 you've never actually put in the oven. Maybe it's green rice for its strangeness. Maybe it's country ham and grits for its elegance. Maybe it's King Ranch chicken because the name alone is a small Texas poem. Cook one a week for a month. Invite somebody over, or don't. Eat it yourself, leftovers and all. Watch what happens. The pan will fog the window. The foil will release its steam. The cheese will stretch. The breadcrumb will crack. Somebody will ask for the recipe. And you will taste, in 5 Tuesday suppers across a single month, a whole decade the rest of the world has tried to forget. You will taste 1965. You will taste your grandmother's kitchen. You will taste America at the exact moment it decided that a 9 by 13 dish and a covered dinner were the shortest distance between love and the table. Cook the 5. You'll taste a decade.